Okay, so welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a minute, as they say. I think this is going to be a very brief chapter called Disarticulations, meaning Deleuze Modeste Disarticulations. I think the last time we published something on YouTube was about 3 months ago, and we were going through psychology and through the logic of sense, Gilles Deleuze's transition. Transition is obviously not the correct word, but his interest in psychology and psychoanalysts. Obviously, we talked about Deleuze Guattari, Lacan, Freud, and many other things, and that is still something we intend to finish. 2004. Just very briefly, I had a bad sentiment before 2004 began that it would kind of be a difficult year, and I'd have to say it has completely gone beyond all of my expectations so far, and it has been quite a catastrophic year. But we will be working on August, picking up the pieces, and so I hopefully we can get things back on track. And as I've always stated, we are here to stay, even though we will have a lot of jumps and breakdowns and discontinuities, jump cuts, etc. We will continue going on with this. So in Disarticulations, I'm just very simply going to show you five books that I've come across in the past few months, which have interested me in one way or another, and especially through the relationship to Deleuze, but also kind of some new, I wouldn't say ideas, but sometimes I get the impression, that obviously we know these are not very rich times in philosophy, cinema, art. But however, we can always find cases of people doing very interesting things. And I think science, that might not be so different from Henri Bergson's times, in which right now philosophy is kind of extremely static, and science is just moving forward everywhere. And as Bergson's vision was to catch up, that philosophy should catch up to science, and those were the times of obviously of the theory of general relativity and Einstein and Bergson's desire to push philosophy to catch up to science, which had been won since centuries and centuries. And then there was this great schism post Spinoza, Leibniz, and theology went its way, science went on its own path, philosophy went on its own path, and that's why some of the stuff that I will present to you is a little bit out there, but they're just some small things that I wanted to share with you. Maybe you'll be interested, maybe not. That will be up to you. So the first thing I wanted to present, this is an old one, huh? This is an old book. I think a lot of Deleuze readers will know it. This is called The 60s Without Apology. And my specific interest in this, and I'll just probably read just like a little paragraph or two of each book just to get the sense, and we won't keep things going on too long. What interests me here is page 137, an essay by the whole book I do find very interesting, but specifically there is an essay by Herman Rappaport called Vietnam, the Thousand Plateaus, in which Rappaport gives us, in my opinion, a very, very interesting and concrete argument for the war in Vietnam being following Bateson's and Deleuze's use of Bateson's concept of the plateau, that this was indeed the territory of Vietnam, a body without organs. And although this is not a part of the essay, what always interested me about this essay is how that kind of evolves into the 1980s and the 1990s, in which you arrive at the peak of the plateau of capitalism, which now we are obviously in a different phase of capitalism. But I'm just going to read you two paragraphs just to give you the idea, and we'll move on from there. So, in Mille Platon, Gilles Deleuze and Deleuze Guattari ask, how can one make a body without parts or organs? That is, how can one make oneself into a schizo? In French, this reads, comment se faire un corps sans organes, which strategically can be reinterpreted as, how is one to produce a corpse without organs, a military corps, like an I corps? How does the unit disarticulate, dematerialize, and frag? It is a military question, but also geographical, for I am thinking about the core as corpse of Vietnam, of the 1,000 plateaus which Deleuze and Guattari pass over, the body of a country, an object of dismemberment, extermination, defilement, supporting so many heterogeneous groups, cultures, languages, a third world overcoated with countless layers of political ideologies, many imports. Essentially, while Buddhist monks self-destruct and the children walk up to strangers with explosive charges in Coke cans, the 1,000 plateaus in Vietnam. In the mountains, there you feel free, a voice says in the wasteland, but not in the plateaus, not in the Nam, that rhizomatic landscape webbed with paddies, bomb craters, villages, jungles, camps, roads, and rivers, what amounted to an evasion of any concrete sense of territory. The bridge made by day was blown up every night, and the next day it had to be erected again by our troops, the Bailey Bridge. To us, it was a sign of peace, a certainty that we could learn to live with. For what we coded by day, they decoded by night. And we thought, maybe they're trying to let us know they are like us, or better a bridge than a rocket attack. Better this game of mastery. We learned to code the Orient as if it were a blank map, with our hill numbers, nicknames, strategies, zones, mines, campsites, that to code the Orient with concertina wire. Don't know that, I'm assuming that's military wire, obviously. It was to enter into a dialogue with an other who would allow us our code if we really wanted it, but only for half the day. As if Western territories could be reduplicated over a rhizomatic landscape that had seen decades of deterritorialization. So I'll stop there. I think you get the point. I'm guessing there's around 20 pages, and this is really, really interesting. And one of the really interesting facts here is, according to Rappaport, is the Western obsession with the full body. And this is not the same, not at all the same in the Orient, especially Vietnam. This concept, it's as if we, for example, if a soldier, and the Vietnamese soldiers knew this very well, quite frequently they would prefer to set traps, not to kill, but to lose a limb. For example, an American soldier would lose a leg, an arm, and that was the destruction of the full body. Well, in the meantime, for the Oriental people, having undergone decades, if not more, of deterritorialization, that the full body is not something inherent into a way of thinking. So, and that's the first one I recommend. The second one I'm going to move on to is published this year, 2024. This is Elia Sambar, La Dernière Guerre, Palestine, 7th October 2023 to the 2nd of April 2024. I haven't quite finished this yet, but if you've seen other podcasts or if you are familiar with Deleuze Guattari, Elias Sambar is obviously one of the most respected writers and poets from Palestine, who was forced to leave Palestine in the war or extermination, might be a better word, of Nakba in 1948. He was forced to flee the country with his family, and they were transported by the English and violently ripped away from their homes. And after many travels in the 1970s, he ended up in Paris, France, and he set up a journal, and then they did a lot of presentations and talks concerning the Palestinian cause, and above all, the need to let the world know that Palestinians are not a group of terrorists, that the Palestinians are just like any other people. They are artists, they are cooks, they are fishermen, they produce things, and that was part of his big struggle, was to show the Western world the contrary through the popular perspective of the Palestinian people as just kind of being these contingent terrorist people. That was absolutely not the case. And as we've seen in our podcast, Elias Sambar and Deleuze Guattari, Guattari visited a lot of these conventions in the 1970s, became good friends with Elias Sambar, urged Gilles Deleuze to meet Elias Sambar, and Deleuze was very, very interested because following l'Anti-Oedipe, the Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze always had been working for years on the idea of nomadology. And so this was kind of a very important meeting between Sambar and Deleuze, and they did several interviews together, which would later form the backbone of Deleuze's book on the grandeur de Yasser Arafat. And so if you read a little bit through those works, the Indians of Palestine, Elias Sambar does indeed have a very important role in Deleuze Guattari's development of the concept of nomadology. And in his new book, he's talking obviously about the conflict today. And when he says La Dernière Guerre, obviously that means, is this the last war? And Sambar is arguing that if you watch the unfolding of what is happening, and you look at this bizarre kind of repetition of 1948, then in his opinion, this time it might be a fully existential war, meaning that this is the final war, and one side will win and one side will lose, which I found very interesting, because we all know we're used to, every couple of years a skirmish breaks out, and I think it should be evident to everyone that Israel has a plan which we talked about in our other podcast, which is not necessarily genocide, but genocide would be okay. But the real plan is just to evacuate the territory and, more importantly, evacuate from history the presence of the Palestinian people. And the argument here is this might be the final push, which Israel is attempting to do. So I've been watching for weeks, the deaths of so many children, of children's hospitals being targeted. I mean, it should be clear that when you're clearly violating every kind of convention that has existed since the Second World War, and your children are really in the target here, it should be pretty obvious that what you're doing is you're destroying the future of the Palestinian people. So once again, I won't go on too long. Check it out for yourself. This should be available on Amazon France. I'm not sure about Amazon.com, but go and take a look. And once again, €2. We live in a world where this book, El Samba, costs €3 on Amazon, and a ticket to a Taylor Swift concert for one person costs $1,000 at least. So, interesting value system we have nowadays. And let's move on to the next. And on that note, actually, obviously this podcast is not sponsored, is absolutely not monetized in any way, shape, or form. And I do not want to obviously propose anything, but what I would urge is that the possibility of making an online donation for however little, however much is possible for the Palestinian cause, I would recommend that. Obviously, you would have to Trustpilot it and search and make sure it's a reliable site. But right now I'm looking at United Nations Crisis Relief, Occupied Palestinian Territory Humanitarian Fund. Is that trustworthy? Don't know. United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, don't know. Red Cross, I would like to hope that that's okay. UNICEF for Palestine, Médecins Sans Frontières, Oxfam, ANERA, Direct Relief. There's a bunch of sites in which you can just donate a little bit of money, cancel your Disney Plus subscription, and just make a one-time payment. And it might be a good idea to support those in need, because I do know some people there who live there currently, and trust me, the situation is very, very dire indeed. So we're going to move on very, very quickly here, because these are three things I came across recently, which are pretty far out there. And I actually came across these watching some podcasts. These don't come from, they come from one show. Sometimes I watch the Joe Rogan show, but when he has kind of, like these speculative archaeologists, Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson seems like kind of a cool guy. They're way out there, but in being out there, there's some form of novelty. They're challenging the system in some way. If it's for profit or whatever, I don't know. But quite often, if you want to dig around for like some concepts, that's not the case, but like some new notions, or just some points that could be interesting. It's kind of interesting. But on the side of Joe Rogan, Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson, their arguments kind of center around the Younger Dryas period, this catastrophe 10,000 years ago, and the pre-existence of what's it called? Atlantic, no, Atlantis, some kind of Atlantis civilization before, which was highly enlightened, blah, 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 blah. Uh, Interesting, could be possible. I doubt that our current concepts of history that we have are valid. I think it goes, Deleuze and Guattari were always famous for saying, the, the further you dig, the further back in time you're going to go. Dig, dig, dig all the way down. You're going to just go back, 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 and back. So it's interesting from that point of view. However, there's some kind of transcendental, story, very idealist story. So these people I came across were from another show, which is called the Danny Jones Show, and his merit is invites people that I think Joe Rogan wouldn't dare to put on the show. Many people that are like so far out there. It's just, it's like, wow, these guys are really all over the place. But there are a few things which I found pretty interesting, especially, and then that's the next three books I'm going to present to you. I haven't read much of them yet, but the general concept is something called retro causality, which obviously these authors, I doubt, are aware of the synthesis of time in Deleuze and indifference and repetition. But Deleuze, there is a kind of openness to Deleuze's third synthesis of time through Kant, which is the empty form of the time, which is specifically the future. And Deleuze takes this up again in the cinema books. And one example I still can't find. We know about the peaks of the present and the sheets of the past, which is Bergson, very Bergsonian. In fact, the title of the chapter, I think it's the time image. It's dedicated to Bergson. But I think there was an example with the Deleuze of a specific French director in the 1960s who was filming, we would call it the peaks of the past, the present, and the future, meaning the coexistence of the past, present, and future. And in Deleuze's third synthesis of time, I believe there's this kind of implicit possibility of retrocausality, meaning we know that the future grasps and holds the present. So the future is not completely undetermined. No, the future is not chaos. It is not deterministic. However, at the same time, what will happen in the future will have a certain degree of continuity with the past. However, it will involve novelty. So we know that the future has a role. Also, the virtual in itself as a quasi-cause, in some kind of way, in my opinion, it does implicate some kind of role of causality of the future on either the past or the present. This would be very complicated, but I really hope to look into this. So I came across an author. His name is Eric Wargo, and he wrote a book called Time Loops, in which, and I repeat, these guys are kind of out there. I mean, they're into the paranormal and what are they called? Remote viewing. And they sustain, these are human qualities which have been lost over time due to the subordination of our souls or spirits or faculties to what but someone called space, to a quantitative world, to our digital world. And they would sustain that we've lost all these kind of capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. Very, very arguable, very, very out there. I'm just going to read you a small bit from Time Loops just to give you what I'm hinting at. And Now, what I'm about to read is an introduction, and it is theoretically a fictional story, but it leads into some more concrete examples of this idea of retro-causality, which is put forth very simply, not in a philosophic way, but it's the future. Um, mm, Having a causality being the cause of what happens in the present, as opposed to the pure causality of the past. So, here we go. Uh, Theotimolene is an aromatic compound extracted from the bark of the shrub Rosaceae carlsbadensis rufo. First isolated and described by Russian botanists in the 1930s, its properties baffled Soviet and American scientists for well over a decade. The extract, a whitish crystalline powder, dissolved so fast when water was added to it that they had to devise a new measuring instrument to measure its solubility accurately. What they found was stunning and at first totally unbelievable. Theotimolene dissolves 1.12 seconds before water touches it. The question chemists always asked about theotimolene effectively personified or anthropomorphized, got it right, the substance. How did it know when or if water was going to be added? Theotimolene's ultra-fast solubility, dubbed endochronicity by the Russians, met with so much initial skepticism in the chemical community that very little further investigation was done on this compound until the early 1950s. So, when the reasons for its extraordinary behavior were finally discovered through a technique called crystallography. Theotimolene is an organic molecule, which means that it contains a carbon atom bonded to other atoms. Carbon forms four such valence bonds, positioned at each point of a tetrahedron. What the Soviet chemists discovered was that the carbon atom in theotimolene is somewhat different than other carbon atoms. Two of its carbon valence bonds extend across the temporal dimension, not a spatial dimension. It means that one of its bonds is slightly in the molecule's past, and another is in the molecule's future. This accounts for theotimolene's curious property of dissolving slightly before water touches it. Eventually, the endochronometer, devised to measure the rate of theotimolene's dissolution, became more interesting than the plant extract by itself, due to the many possible real-world applications of performing measurements on a four-dimensional molecule. Think about it. If the adding versus not adding of water to a lump of chemical could somehow be tied to an outcome having real-world relevance, the weather, the winner of a horse race, the success of a satellite launch, or the attacks of an enemy in war, then a genuine predictor of future events was within grasp. Although 1.12 seconds is not much forewarning of an event, chaining together a lot of endochronometers, each with their little lumps of theotimolene, would greatly enlarge that narrow window and create the world's first precognitive circuit, what researchers call a telechronic battery. So, So in my introduction, this, of course, is a hoax, which was written by Isaac Asimov. However, the book goes to research this notion based on Asimov of what the author maintains are called time loops, meaning the future having causality on quasi causality, let's say. on the present. And while in itself, obviously, this is not a philosophic test, nor is it explicitly scientific. But I do find it interesting is that, the more this science is just unhinged and, going all over the place and at least the idea of linear time is being put into question. And well, there's so many the books on Deleuze, like Deleuze's Time Machine, where they say, is time travel possible? And, the answer was in Deleuze's mind, we were constantly in a state of time travel. So this whole issue of the third synthesis of time being left possibly a little open by Deleuze as just Kant's empty form of time. It's interesting at the same time to think about this retro causality, which I would not interpret in the way the author is interpreting. I just found it interesting that he's kind of looking into this. It's not like that famous what's his name? Oh my God. Tom Cruise film with the precogs and all that. No, not at all. That's obviously a bad interpretation. So on that note, I am going to very, very quickly, because I've just touched on these, move on to forbidden archaeology. And once again, the idea of forbidden archaeology, and I'm just going to read you a paragraph there. You should see the authors in this list here. And by the way, all of this stuff is on Amazon. And I think in Kindle or in audiobook form, it's all free. It costs absolutely nothing, or like $3, or audible books are zero. So once again, we can see how valued these books are by contemporary society. Now, as I understand it, the fundamental concept of forbidden archaeology is that it might be easier if I read it. Obviously, they're challenging the current notions of human history, and as it was presented to me. This in the 18th century, a lot of journals, very prestigious journals, had cited many examples and actual archaeological finds that would demonstrate like human footprints 30 million years ago in like a strata of rock extremely far down. Another example was they would find a highly articulated gold necklace compressed in a strata of rock, which carbon dates to 50 million years ago now. And, the big question here is, how is this possible? And I will read this very quickly, and this will basically explain itself. In 1979, researchers at the Leotoli, Tanzania, site in East Africa, discovered footprints in volcanic ash deposits over 3.6 million years old. Mary Leakey and others said the prints were indistinguishable from those of modern humans. To these scientists, this meant only that the human ancestors of 3.6 million years ago had remarkable modern feet. But according to other scientists, such as physical anthropologist R. H. Tuttle of the University of Chicago, fossil bones of the known Australopithecines of 3.6 million years ago show they had feet that were distinctly ape-like. Hence, they were incompatible with the Leotoli prints. In an article in the March 1990 issue of Natural History, Tuttle confessed that we are left with somewhat of a mystery. It seems permissible, therefore, to consider a possibility neither Tuttle nor Leakey mentioned, that creatures with anatomically modern human bodies to match their anatomically modern human feet existed some 3.6 million years ago in East Africa. Perhaps, as suggested in the illustration on the opposite page, they coexisted with more ape-like creatures. As intriguing as this archaeological, knowledgeable persons will warn against positing the existence of anatomically modern human millions of years ago on the slim basis of the Laetoli footprints. But there is a further evidence. Over the past few decades, scientists in Africa have uncovered fossil bones that look remarkably human. In 1965, Brian Patterson and W. Howells found a surprisingly modern humerus, upper arm bone, at Kanapwe, Kenya. Scientists judged the humerus to be over 4 million years old. Henry M. McHenry and Robert S. Corrucini of the University of California said the Kanapwe humerus was barely distinguishable from the modern Homo. Similarly, Richard Leakey said that the ER1481 femur thigh bone from Lake Turkana, Kenya, found in 1972, was indistinguishable from that of modern humans. Scientists normally assign the ER1481 femur, which is about 2 million years old, to pre-human Homo habilis. But since the ER1481 femur was found by itself, one cannot rule out the possibility that the rest of the skeleton was also anatomically modern. Interestingly enough, in 1913, the German scientist Hans Reck found at Olduvai Gorge, Tanzania, a complete anatomically modern human skeleton in a strata over 1 million years old, inspiring decades of controversy. So I think that's enough. I think we get the point. And this book is a huge book, and I've downloaded it on Kindle, and just full of all kinds of these examples. And part of the point here was in the 18th century, perhaps things were a little more open. I'm pretty sure things were a little more open, and it was very common for these examples to be discussed and museums to show them and to discuss these issues. However, with the advent of the 19th century, I mean, this stuff just totally disappeared and then became forbidden to talk about, and the documentation from the 18th century is there in the archives. So, it's very hard to deny the existence. You can obviously debate on the subject matter. Now, I found a perfect human skeleton that dates back 5 million years ago. Okay, we can all go and debate over the in an empirical way over the data itself. But the interesting thing is how this stuff is all just kind of thrown under the rug and just kind of became heresy. So once again, I repeat, Deleuze and Guattari famously said, the more you dig, the further back you go. But this leads me to the final one, the final book, and which interested me. And I will have to be very careful here because this guy's way out there. And I am talking about, and I watched his podcast on Danny Jones. This is Jason Reza Giorgiani, who's from New York. And he is at least a master's in philosophy, if not a PhD, just a highly controversial person because he's from Iranian origin and he got mixed up with all kinds of shady associations he was trying to help overthrow the Islamic regime in Iran. And kind of a nutty guy. Like last night I was watching some podcast where he was maintaining that the moon has to be artificial. And the reason he is because he said the moon forms a perfect eclipse with the sun, like mathematically, infinitesimally perfect. And that eclipse is been the basis throughout human history of the development of time, of astronomy, of watches, of clocks, and then he says that there's just like an infinitely small chance that you would have an orbiting moon that would have the absolute exact radius of the perspective of the sun from Earth, which would create these perfect. So, oh my goodness, who knows what to believe? But the idea that the moon is artificial, I would need a lot of shots to warm me up to the idea. But shots are okay. Nothing wrong with that. But what he was, amongst all kinds of crazy things, he was, and this has nothing to do with Deleuze or philosophy. It's just totally nutty. But my only point here is this is another case of retro causality, which is just kind of nutty. But he cited this book, Forbidden Archaeology, and he said, okay, I've looked over the archives, I've read this book numerous times, and to me, I do not dispute the data, meaning that, if you go into the book, literally there are cases of intricate jewelry found compressed in strata of rock, which date back to 30 million years ago. And he says, well, I don't dispute the data, but I dispute their interpretation because he maintains that the authors are, I can't remember, Vedic or he's saying that they're like spiritual, no? The authors belong to a specific type of Indian spiritualism, which, like the Greeks, believed that the time is cyclical, and then we go from a golden age back to silver age to a bronze age, and then you go into an age of degradation, which ironically is our age right now. But then you go back, and it just goes infinitely back into time, these cycles. So they have no problem stating that, in our opinion, 50 million years ago, there were basically modern Homo sapiens that coexisted with apes, and all the weirdness associated with that, especially from a Darwinistic point of view. But what Jason Giorgiani maintains, and I have two books. His most provocative one is called Prometheus and Atlas, which you'll find on Amazon at a very reduced price, if not free. I think his latest one is called Philosophy of the Future. Maybe we'll end up just reading a piece of that for shits and giggles. Giorgiani says, no, my problem is I accept the data that 50 million years ago there were modern Homo sapiens on this planet, but I cannot go against Darwin and Darwinism because mankind had to have evolved. And therefore, the only plausible solution I find is that those things that we are finding, those people, those artifacts, like there are also city walls documented in this book, like concrete glossed walls that date back 20 million years. And he said the only plausible solution is those are time travelers from the future who sporadically went back in time 30 million years to do what? I have no idea. He said it's impossible that mankind, from an evolutionary point of view, would date back to the time of the dinosaurs, because it's just not feasible. Because once again, thinking of all the catastrophes, asteroids that hit the Earth, he's saying that there's absolutely no way you can give a continuity that goes back that far. So the only plausible solution is time travel, meaning that these are people from the future that have gone back to the past. So, nutty idea. The only thing I found interesting about that is, once again, this idea of retro causality. Sorry, that the future is somehow, well, that's a very blatant example, but I will dig up this film that Deleuze cites, in which you have, I have the DVD back at home, huh? It's a film in which you have a story played out. It's not the Buñuel one. It's another one where you have past, present, and future coexisting. So the same story uh, is occurring in the past, present, and future in coexistence, and therefore, with this concept of coexistence, it's also implicit, in my opinion, this possibility of causality between these dimensions of time. So let's not drag in too much. Let's just look at one quick piece from Philosophy of the Future, just so you get an idea of who you're dealing with before you decide to get into this. What in God's name is this? Okay. That's a preface by some weird 70 guy. Wisdom is a woman, and she only ever loves a warrior. That is Friedrich Nietzsche. I also noticed that as out there as he is, Giorgiani, when he talks about philosophy, specifically Heidegger and Techne, he seems to be pretty well trained, at least on Heidegger. So, okay, this is the introduction by Giorgiani to his latest book. The most fundamental problem of philosophy is the question of the future. It is no coincidence that Friedrich Nietzsche, who subtitled his book Beyond Good and Evil with the phrase Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future, is the same philosopher who reached back to the ancient Iranian thinker Zarathustra, so as to adopt a second coming of this visionary as the mouthpiece for his gospel for the overman. Actually, as I explained in Novel Folklore 2017, Nietzsche saw himself as a kind of John the Baptist figure who was preparing the way for the return of Zarathustra as the philosopher of the future. So it's not lost on Nietzsche how and why philosophy, as an enterprise in recorded human history, begins with the question of the future in the teachings of the Persian prophet. Indeed, Nietzsche goes so far as to claim that only the Persians had a philosophy of history, in a recognition of the fact that prior to Zarathustra, every culture had only a cyclical and fatalistic view of time. The invention of the future and the future as invention is at the core of the revolutionary revaluation of all values that Zarathustra is responsible for, and that Nietzsche believes that Zarathustra will come back in order to complete, albeit by means of its dialectical reversal in the destruction of the moral world order that he set in motion. Again, this subject is addressed in my book, Novel Folklore. The purpose of the present discourse is to provide the reader with a summary of my philosophical project that can be read either as an introduction to my entire corpus or as a conclusion wherein that project culminates and crystallizes. It is, however, in no way a substitute for reading the many volumes of the corpus that I repeatedly reference throughout this text. That having been said, a number of defunct or revised positions in my thinking are clearly abrogated herein. The title of this overview is aptly taken from the fact that my work as a philosopher has, more than anything, revolved around the future as an idea with extremely provocative ontological, epistemological, aesthetic, ethical, and political dimensions with catastrophic implications. Nietzsche, writing in the late 19th century, could just barely discern some of these as he viewed through a glass darkly, but one thing is clear. If he were alive today, and perhaps a reincarnation of him is one of my readers, he would lament how philosophy has apparently given up on the future. Almost no philosophers worthy of the name have addressed the imminent challenges that face humanity with converging crises that are literally apocalyptic in scope and scale. The technological singularity, catastrophic disclosure of putatively alien intelligence, and what I call the spectral revolution, attendant to mainstream scientific validation or parapsychology, Almost no contemporary philosophers have addressed these inextricable and compound catastrophes, as well as other attendant revolutionary changes, such as, for example, the inevitable total revision of our understanding of human history and the forces that have shaped it, not just from the past into the present, but from the future into the past. But to make this statement, as Nietzsche no doubt would have, with the same hindsight that we are afforded with, is also to make a claim about who counts as a philosopher. So, on the podcast, I found him way out there, but for the introductory text, I don't find anything particularly shocking or scandalous. Yes, he's calling for parapsychology, which is the spectral revolution. Okay, not so good. Alien intelligence, technological singularity. Well, but still, there seems to be something vaguely interesting. So, in the upcoming weeks, I might try and go through this, grab my machete, and see if I can hack my way through some pages and see if there's something potentially interesting inside of it. Anyway, I've taken up enough of your time as usual. It's good to be back, and we count on being back in the upcoming weeks again. And as always, to those who take the time to follow us, we greatly appreciate you, and we wish everybody all the best. So thank you, and until next time, take care.